I still can't drive past Lake Michigan without my hands shaking on the steering wheel. What happened 3 summers ago changed everything I thought I knew about trust, about friendship, and about how quickly paradise can become hell. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how a perfect summer getaway became the worst nightmare of my life. It started when my college friend, Jessica, invited me to her family's lake house for a week in July. We'd been roommates freshman year, and even though we drifted apart after graduation, I was excited to reconnect. The lake house was everything she'd described during those late-night dorm conversations. A sprawling cedar cabin nestled among towering pines, with a private dock extending into crystal-clear water. Jessica's boyfriend Marcus was there too, along with her cousin Trevor, who I'd never met but who seemed friendly enough when we were introduced. The first 2 days were perfect. We spent our time swimming, grilling on the deck, and catching up on old times. Jessica seemed genuinely happy to see me, and I started to remember why we'd been such good friends. But on the third night, things began to feel not off. I was lying in the guest bedroom, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the dock, when I heard voices coming from downstairs. At first, I thought nothing of it. Jessica and Marcus often stayed up late talking, but as I listened more carefully, I realized there was a third voice, Trevor's voice, and they were arguing about something in hushed, urgent tones. I crept to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood. I could only catch fragments of their conversation, but certain words made my blood run cold. "She doesn't suspect anything," Jessica was saying. "Perfect timing," Marcus replied. "When?" Trevor asked. "Tomorrow night," Jessica answered. It looked like an accident. I felt my knees go weak. They were talking about me. They had to be. I was the only other person in the house, the only she they could be referring to. But why? What had I done? What did they want from me? I barely slept that night, my mind racing with paranoid thoughts. Had I done something to offend Jessica? Was this about money? During our college years, she'd always seemed resentful of my scholarship while her parents paid her way. Or was it something else entirely? The next morning, they all acted perfectly normal, which somehow made it worse. Jessica made me my favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, and Trevor complimented my swimming technique when we went for our morning dip. Marcus cracked jokes and suggested we take the speedboat out later. I played along, forcing smiles and laughter while my stomach churned with dread as the day wore on. I became hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation when they thought I wasn't listening. When Jessica suggested we all go night fishing after dinner, my heart nearly stopped. "The fish bite best after midnight," she said with that same sweet smile she'd worn all week. "We'll anchor in the deep water, away from shore. It'll be so peaceful." Trevor nodded enthusiastically. "I brought all the gear," he said. "Sarah, you've never been night fishing, have you? It's a completely different experience." Marcus was already preparing the boat, checking the engine and loading supplies. Too many supplies, I noticed. Heavy rope, a plastic tarp, tools that had nothing to do with fishing. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead I locked myself in and tried to think. I could call 911, but what would I tell them? That my friends were planning something vague for tomorrow night that might involve me, that they were being too nice, that they'd packed suspicious items for a fishing trip. I had no proof, no concrete evidence, just overheard fragments and a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. I considered running, but we were miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest and connected to civilization by a single winding road that Trevor's truck was blocking. When I emerged from the bathroom, Jessica was waiting for me in the hallway. "You okay, Sarah? You seem anxious today." Her voice was gentle, concerned, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Just tired, I guess." She moved closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. The same vanilla scent she'd worn in college. "You know," she said quietly, "I've always admired how trusting you are, how you always see the best in people. It's such a rare quality." The way she said it, like she was talking about a weakness rather than a strength, made my skin crawl. Was a surreal experience. Trevor had grilled steaks, and we ate them on the deck as the sun set over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. The conversation flowed normally. Memories from college, plans for the fall, gossip about mutual friends. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension building like storm clouds on the horizon. Every time I looked up, one of them was watching me. When I excused myself to get more wine from the kitchen, I heard their voices drop to whispers behind me as we prepared for the fishing trip. I made a desperate decision. While the others were loading the boat, I slipped back into the house and grabbed a kitchen knife, hiding it in my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I also found Jessica's cell phone charging on the kitchen counter and quickly sent a text to my sister, Emma, at Jessica's lake house. "If something happens to me, question Jessica Martinez, Marcus Webb, and Trevor Martinez. Love you." I deleted the message from the sent folder and put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. The boat ride to their chosen fishing spot took 20 minutes, taking us far from shore into the deepest part of the lake. The moon was just a sliver, and without any light pollution, the darkness was absolute. Marcus anchored the boat while Jessica distributed fishing rods. Trevor opened a cooler and pulled out beers for everyone. "To old friends," he said, raising his bottle, "and new experiences." The others drank, but I only pretended to sip mine, paranoid that they might have drugged it. For the first hour, we actually fished, though no one seemed particularly focused on catching anything. The conversation grew more stilted, punctuated by long silences broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the boat hull. Then Jessica stood up suddenly, her fishing rod clattering to the deck. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." My heart hammered against my ribs as Marcus and Trevor exchanged glances. "Do you remember sophomore year?" Jessica continued, stepping closer to where I sat near the boat's edge. "When you got that internship at Morrison and Associates?" "The one I wanted," I remembered. It had been a competitive position at a prestigious law firm, and I'd been thrilled. When they selected me, "I applied for that internship too," Jessica said, her voice growing harder. "I had better grades, better connections, more experience, but they chose you instead. Do you know why?" I shook my head, afraid to speak. "Because you slept with Mr. Morrison's son at that party." "Don't deny it. I saw you leave together." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Jessica, that's not what happened. David and I talked for maybe 10 minutes. I never slept with him. I never slept with anyone to get that internship." But even as I said it, I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. Worse, she didn't want to believe me. She needed this narrative, this justification for whatever she was planning to do. That internship was supposed to be mine, she continued, her voice rising. "It would have changed everything. My whole career path, my whole life. Instead, I had to settle for that nothing position at my father's friend's firm, filing papers and getting coffee. All because you couldn't keep your legs closed for one night." Trevor and Marcus were standing now too, forming a triangle around me. I was trapped at the edge of the boat with nowhere to go but into the black water. And then Jessica went on. "You had the nerve to act like we were still friends, like nothing had happened. Inviting me to your graduation party, your housewarming. Always so sweet and innocent, it made me sick." Her hand moved to her jacket, and I saw the glint of metal. A knife, larger than the one in my pocket. But when I inherited this lake house last year, I knew it was a sign. The perfect place to finally balance the scales. I knew I had to act fast. As Jessica raised the knife, I threw myself sideways, rolling toward the center of the boat and pulling my own knife from my pocket. "Stay back," I screamed, brandishing the blade. "I didn't do what you think I did. You're wrong about everything." But they were beyond reasoning now. Marcus lunged for my legs while Trevor tried to grab my wrist. In the chaos, someone kicked over the cooler and beer bottles crashed across the deck, making the surface slippery. And treacherous Jessica came at me again, her knife gleaming in the moonlight. I dodged, but the boat's motion threw me off balance and I stumbled backward. The knife grazed my shoulder, sending a line of fire across my skin. I swung wildly with my own blade and felt it connect with something soft. Trevor screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers, black in the moonlight. "You psychotic bitch," Marcus shouted, charging toward me. I scrambled across the slippery deck, trying to put the boat's center console between us, but he was faster and stronger. His hands closed around my throat, squeezing until spots danced in front of my eyes. I brought my knee up as hard as I could, connecting with his groin. He doubled over, gasping, and I broke. Free. Jessica was advancing again, her face twisted with rage and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "This is so much better than I planned," she said. "Now it really will look like self-defense." Poor Jessica, attacked by her unstable college friend during what was supposed to be a peaceful fishing trip. She slashed at me again, and this time the blade caught my forearm, opening a deep gash that immediately began bleeding profusely. I realized then that my only chance was the water. It was a desperate move. We were at least half a mile from shore, in the deepest part of the lake, and I wasn't a strong swimmer. But staying on the boat meant certain death. As Jessica raised her knife for what she intended to be the killing blow, I took a running leap over the side of the boat. The water was shockingly cold, driving the breath from my lungs and making my wounded arm burn like acid. I surfaced, gasping, and immediately began swimming toward what I hoped was the direction of shore. Behind me, I could hear them arguing on the boat. Should we go after her? Trevor was asking. "She never make it," Marcus replied. "Let her drown. It's cleaner this way." But Jessica's voice cut through their debate. "No, we finish this. She could make it to shore, and then what? Start the engine." The sound of the boat motor roaring to life was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. I dove underwater, swimming as deep as I could, my lungs burning, and my wounded arm leaving a trail of blood that I prayed wouldn't attract any predators. When I surfaced for air, the boat was circling, its spotlight sweeping the water. I dove again, swimming in a different direction, trying to use the darkness as cover. This deadly game of cat and mouse continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Each time I surfaced, they seemed to be getting closer, the spotlight beam passing mere feet from my head. My strength was fading fast, blood loss and exhaustion taking their toll. The shore seemed impossibly far away, and I began to accept that I was going to die in this lake. My body eventually washing up as evidence of Jessica's self-defense story, but then, just as my muscles were beginning to fail and I wasn't sure I could dive again, I heard another sound over the boat motor, sirens. Lots of them, coming from the direction of the lake house. The spotlight on Jessica's boat began sweeping more, frantically, and I could hear them arguing again, their voices carrying clearly across the water. "Someone called the police," Trevor was saying. "How is that possible? We're in the middle of nowhere." "It doesn't matter," Jessica snapped. "Find her." We have to find her before they get here. I treaded water silently, watching as multiple emergency vehicles converged on the lake house, their red and blue lights painting the trees in alternating colors. A police boat was being launched, its own powerful spotlight beginning to sweep the lake. Jessica's boat was caught between searching for me and fleeing from the approaching authorities. "Forget her," Marcus was saying. "We have to go. Now." We'll say she attacked us and fell overboard during the struggle. I could hear the boat turning, its engine growing louder as it headed back toward shore. But they were too late. The police boat intercepted them halfway back, and in the distance, I could hear the mechanical voice of a bullhorn ordering them to cut their engine and prepare to be boarded. Swimming toward the police boat was the longest journey of my life. My wounded arm had gone numb, and I was barely managing to keep my head above water. When the officer finally pulled me from the lake, I was hypothermic and delirious, babbling about knives and conspiracies and fishing trips that weren't really fishing trips. It wasn't until I was in the hospital, warm and safe and stitched up, that I learned how the police had found me. My sister Emma had received my text, and knowing that I never sent cryptic messages like that, had immediately called the police. When they'd found the lake house empty and the boat missing, they'd launched a full search and rescue operation. The text message had saved my life, just as I desperately hoped it would. Jessica, Marcus, and Trevor were all arrested and charged with attempted murder. During the investigation, police found Jessica's journal in her bedroom at the lake house, filled with months of detailed planning for what she called Sarah's Reckoning. She'd been obsessed with the internship incident for years, building an entire mythology around it that bore no resemblance to reality. The journal revealed that she'd been planning to kill me since the day she'd inherited the property, seeing it as the perfect opportunity for revenge. At the trial, Jessica showed no remorse. She maintained that I'd ruined her life and deserved to die, that she'd done nothing wrong by trying to correct what she saw as a cosmic injustice. Marcus and Trevor, faced with overwhelming evidence and Jessica's complete lack of sanity, bargained for lighter sentences in exchange for their testimony. They each received 15 years. Jessica was sentenced to life without parole. I moved across the country after the trial, changing my name and starting over completely. I've never been swimming since that night, and I can't look at lakes or rivers without seeing Jessica's face in the water, twisted with rage and madness. The physical scars healed within months, but the psychological ones remain. I don't trust easily anymore. I don't accept invitations to remote locations. And I never, ever go anywhere without telling someone exactly where I'll be and when to expect me back. The most terrifying part isn't that Jessica tried to kill me. It's that she'd been planning it for years while maintaining our friendship. All those birthday cards, those cheerful social media comments, those invitations to get together that I declined because I was too busy with work. She'd been fantasizing about my death the entire time. She taught me that the most dangerous person in your life might be the one who smiles at you every day, while secretly nurturing years of resentment and rage. Sometimes, I wonder how many other people are walking around with Jessicas in their lives, friends, family members, co-workers who smile and laugh and act perfectly normal while harboring murderous thoughts. The idea keeps me awake at night, listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there, watching for shadows that move wrong, because I learned the hard way that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look exactly like your best friend from college, offering you blueberry pancakes and a fun week at the lake house. Working security at an abandoned mall should have been the easiest job in the world. I was wrong about that and almost died because of my assumption. My name is David, and what I experienced during my brief employment at Pinewood Mall still haunts every quiet night I work. Still makes me check every shadow twice before I convince myself it's empty. I'd taken the job out of desperation. 3 months unemployed after the factory where I'd worked for 8 years suddenly closed down. My friend Carlos, who worked for Sentinel Security Services, told me about an opening for a night watchman at Pinewood Mall, a shopping center that had been shuttered for nearly 2 years, but still needed security to prevent vandalism and theft of copper wiring. "It's perfect for you," Carlos had said. "Quiet, easy work. Just walk around with a flashlight a few times per shift. Make sure nobody's breaking in. You can even study for your electrician certification while you're there." The pay was decent, and I needed the money, so I accepted without asking too many questions. My supervisor, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, gave me a quick orientation. On my first night, the mall had been a thriving shopping destination in the 90s and early 2000s, but changing consumer habits and competition from newer centers had slowly drained its life. By the time it officially closed, only a handful of stores remained open, their merchandise looking pathetic and desperate under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Pretty standard setup," Henderson explained as we walked through the main concourse, our footsteps echoing off the empty walls. "You've got your standard security checkpoints, the main entrances, the service corridors, the old anchor stores. Most of the interior store gates are locked, but you'll need to check them periodically. Sometimes homeless people try to break, and especially when it gets cold." He handed me a thick ring of keys and a heavy-duty flashlight. "Your shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. There's a security office near the old food court where you can take breaks. Watch the monitors. Any questions?" I asked about the other guards, whether I'd be working alone or with a partner. Henderson's expression grew slightly uncomfortable. "You'll be solo," he said. "We had a 2-man team until last month, but..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Let's just say the previous guards weren't reliable. Too many false alarms, too many complaints about hearing things that weren't there. Mall security can play tricks on your mind, especially the overnight shift. All those empty spaces, all that silence. Some people aren't cut out for it. That should have been my first warning, but I needed the job too badly to pay attention to." Red flags. Henderson showed me the security office, a cramped room filled with banks of monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the mall. Most of the screens showed the same thing: empty corridors, motionless escalators, vacant storefronts with their metal gates pulled down like closed eyes. A few cameras had gone dark entirely, their screens showing only static or solid black. "Don't worry about the dead cameras," Henderson said. "We're not paying to repair them until the property sells. Just focus on the ones that work and do your rounds every 2 hours. If you see anything unusual, and I mean actually unusual, not shadows or reflections, call the police first, then call me." He left me with a thermos of coffee and a stack of incident report forms, most of which appeared to be blank. The first few nights were exactly as advertised: quiet, uneventful, almost boring. I'd make my rounds with the flashlight, checking doors and windows, occasionally startling a mouse or rat that had taken up residence in one of the empty stores. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of emergency lighting and the occasional creak of the building settling. I used the quiet time to study, spreading my electrician textbooks across the security desk and working through practice problems. But on my 4th night, things began to change. I was reviewing a chapter on 3-way switches when movement on one of the monitors caught my attention. Camera 7, which covered the main entrance near what used to be a department store, showed a figure standing just outside the glass doors. At first, I thought it might be a homeless person looking for shelter, or maybe a vandal casing the building. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and headed toward the entrance to investigate. The walk from the security office to the main entrance took about 5 minutes, winding through the central concourse and past dozens of empty storefronts. When I reached the doors, however, there was no one there. I checked the immediate area outside, walking the perimeter of the building, but found no signs that anyone had been there at all. When I returned to the security office, camera 7 showed the same empty entrance as before. I chalked it up to a glitch in the system, or maybe a reflection that had fooled me, but it bothered me enough that I watched the monitors more carefully. For the rest of the night, around 3 a.m., I saw movement again, this time on camera 12, which covered a service corridor near the old food court. The figure was more distinct this time, clearly a person, though I couldn't make out any details, due to the poor quality of the feed. They appeared to be walking slowly down the corridor, but when I reached the location, I found nothing but empty hallway. This pattern continued over the next several nights. I'd see movement on the cameras, rush to investigate, and find nothing. The figures appeared on different cameras each time, sometimes near entrances, sometimes deep within the mall's interior. They never seemed to be doing anything threatening, just walking, standing, occasionally what looked like browsing in front of empty storefronts, as if the stores were still open and filled with merchandise. I began to suspect that someone was playing an elaborate prank on me, though I couldn't figure out how they were managing it. The figures only appeared when I was looking at the monitors, never when I was making my rounds. They moved through areas that I had just checked and found secure. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know where the cameras were, always staying just within the frame, as if they wanted to be seen. By the end of my first week, I was starting to understand why Henderson had mentioned that the previous guards had reported hearing things that weren't there. I hadn't heard anything yet, but the visual anomalies were becoming more frequent and more unsettling. The figures were appearing in groups now, 2 or 3 at a time, spread throughout the mall, as if they were coordinating their movements. Then, on my 8th night, I heard them dot. It started as a faint sound, barely audible, like a hum of the emergency lighting footsteps echoing from somewhere deep within the mall. I was in the security office, watching the monitors when the sound reached me. Soft, measured footsteps, like someone trying to walk quietly, but not quite succeeding. I checked every camera feed, but saw nothing unusual. The footsteps continued for several minutes, growing slightly louder, as if whoever was making them was moving closer to the security office. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and ventured out into the mall. Following the sound, the footsteps seemed to be coming from the direction of the old anchor store on the north end of the building, a 3-level department store that had been closed for over 5 years. As I walked through the main concourse, the footsteps grew, louder and more distinct. It sounded like at least 2 people, possibly more, walking in formation like soldiers on patrol. But when I reached the department store entrance, the sound stopped abruptly. I stood in the silence for several minutes, my flashlight beam dancing across the store's security gate and empty display windows. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. It was as if whoever had been walking had simply vanished the moment I arrived. Was turning to leave when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Quiet, muffled laughter coming from somewhere inside the abandoned store. Not malicious or threatening, just normal human laughter, like people sharing a private joke. But there was no way anyone could be inside the store. The security gate was locked with 3 different padlocks, and I could see through the gaps that the interior was empty except for a few pieces of abandoned fixtures. I called out, "Hello? Is someone in there? This is security." The laughter stopped immediately, replaced by complete silence. I waited for several more minutes, but heard nothing else. When I returned to the security office, the monitors showed the same empty corridors. As always, I wrote up an incident report, though I wasn't sure how to describe what I'd experienced without sounding crazy. The next night, My friend Carlos stopped by during his rounds to check on me. "How's the new gig working out?" he asked, settling into a chair in the security office. I told him about the strange sounds and the figures on the cameras, expecting him to laugh it off or suggest that I was letting the isolation get to me. Instead, his expression grew serious. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that sounds about right. I probably should have warned you, but I thought maybe it would be different for you. Maybe you OULDN single quotes T ... notice things." I asked him what he meant. "The guys who worked here before you, Johnson and Martinez, they reported the same stuff. Started about a week into the job, just like you're describing. Figures on cameras that weren't there when you went to check. Footsteps, voices, sounds of activity in empty parts of the building." Carlos leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he were afraid of being overheard. But it got worse for them, a lot worse. By the end, they were calling in multiple incidents every night, claiming they were being followed, that someone was trying to break into the security office. Martinez swore that people were having conversations right outside the office door, but every time he opened it, the corridor was empty. He paused, looking uncomfortable. They both quit the same night, about 6 weeks ago. Wouldn't even finish their shift. Just walked off the job and never came back. I asked why Henderson hadn't told me any of this during my orientation. Carlos shrugged. "Would you have taken the job if you'd known? Henderson needs someone to watch this place, and most people won't work alone in an abandoned building once they hear stories like that. He probably figured you'd be different, or that maybe the ... activity ... would calm down after a while." That night, armed with this new information, I paid closer attention to everything happening around me. The figures on the cameras appeared, right on schedule around midnight and then again at 3 a.m. But this time, instead of rushing to investigate, I stayed in the security office and watched them more carefully. What I saw made me question everything I thought I understood about the situation. The figures moved with purpose, not like intruders or vandals, but like people who belonged there. They walked in groups, pausing to look at empty storefronts as if window shopping. Some appeared to be carrying packages, others seemed to be engaged in conversation, their body language animated and social. It was exactly like watching people in a functioning mall, except that the mall had been empty for 2 years. Around 2 a.m., I decided to try something different. Instead of going to investigate when I saw movement on the cameras, I used the intercom system to speak directly into the areas where the figures appeared. "This is security," I announced, my voice echoing through the empty corridors. "I can see you on camera. Please identify yourselves and explain what you're doing in the building." The response was immediate and terrifying. Every monitor in the security office went to static simultaneously, the screens filling with gray snow and electronic noise. The lights in the office flickered, and I heard the distinct sound of every security gate in the mall rattling at once, as if a powerful wind had blown through the building. The noise lasted for about 30 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. When the monitors came back online, they showed empty corridors once again, but something had changed. The quality of the silence was different now, heavier somehow. Like the air pressure had dropped, and I could swear I heard whispers coming from the ventilation system, not words I could understand, but definitely human voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once in hushed, urgent tones. I tried to convince myself that it was all explainable. Old building settling, electrical problems, my imagination working overtime due to stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew I was experiencing something far beyond normal security work. The abandoned mall wasn't as empty as it appeared. Something was inhabiting the space, and my presence was clearly unwelcome. Over the next several nights, the activity escalated dramatically. The figures on the cameras became more aggressive, moving directly toward the cameras as if approaching the viewer. The whispers in the ventilation system grew louder and more frequent, sometimes resolving into what sounded like conversations in languages I didn't recognize. And the footsteps, there were footsteps everywhere now, echoing from every direction. At once, making it impossible to determine their source. The breaking point came on my 15th night on the job. I was making my 2 a.m. rounds when I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. Music. Faint but unmistakable, it was coming. From the direction of the old record store near the center of the mall. Not just any music, but Christmas carols, playing at the volume you'd expect in a functioning retail environment. Silver bells echoed through the empty corridors as I approached the source, my flashlight beam dancing across vacant storefronts. The music was definitely coming from inside the record store, which had been gutted when the business closed. Its interior stripped of everything but bare walls and empty display cases. Yet through the security gate, I could see warm light glowing inside, and the music was now clearly audible, along with the sound of people talking and laughing. It sounded like a Christmas shopping crowd, dozens of voices blending together in the acoustic signature of a busy store. I called out, "Hello, this is building security. The mall is closed. You need to leave immediately." The music stopped instantly, cut off mid-note as if someone had yanked a power cord from the wall. The light inside the store went dark, and the voices fell silent. But instead of emptiness, I was left with something far more disturbing, the sound of breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone who had been running, coming from directly on the other side of the security gate. I aimed my flashlight through the gate, illuminating the store's interior. It was completely empty, just bare walls and concrete. Floors. But the breathing continued, so close that I could have reached through the gate and touched whoever was making the sound. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. "I can hear you breathing. Show yourself." The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, in a voice so close it could have been whispered directly in my ear, someone said, "You don't belong here." The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but carried an undertone of absolute menace that made every hair on my body stand on end. I backed away from the gate, my flashlight shaking in my trembling hands. As I retreated, I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't alone. Other voices joined it, creating a chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here. You don't belong here." The chant followed me as I fled back toward the security office, growing louder and more insistent with each repetition. When I reached the office, I slammed the door behind me and immediately called Henderson's emergency number. The phone rang and rang, but he didn't answer. I tried Carlos next, but got his voicemail. I was completely alone in the building with whatever was happening around me, and the voices were now clearly audible, even through the closed office door. I looked at the monitors, expecting to see empty corridors as usual, but instead saw something that nearly made me flee the building immediately. Every camera showed figures, dozens of them, filling the walkways and corridors of the mall. They weren't the shadowy, indistinct shapes I'd been seeing before. These were clear, detailed images of people in clothing that looked decades out of date. They moved with purpose, walking in groups toward the security office, their faces turned upward toward the cameras as if they were looking directly at me. The chanting grew louder. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." I could hear footsteps in the corridor outside the office, lots of them, like a crowd approaching. The door handle rattled as if someone was trying to open it, but I had locked it from the inside. The rattling became more violent, accompanied by what sounded like fists pounding on the door. I grabbed the radio and tried to call for backup, but got only static. My cell phone had no signal, which was strange because I'd had full bars earlier in the evening. The landline in the office was completely dead. I was trapped, surrounded by sounds of an increasingly agitated crowd that shouldn't exist, with no way to call for help. The pounding on the door suddenly stopped, replaced by an even more terrifying sound: scratching. It sounded like fingernails dragging across wood, coming from all sides of the office at once. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor seemed to vibrate with the sound of dozens of people clawing at the barriers that separated us. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, everything stopped. Complete silence fell over the mall, so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The monitors showed empty corridors once again. The scratching, the chanting, the footsteps, all of it had vanished as if it had never happened. I sat in that office for the remaining 4 hours of my shift, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. When dawn finally broke and Henderson arrived to relieve me, I was a wreck. I told him everything that had happened, expecting him to dismiss my experience as stress-induced hallucinations. Instead, he listened quietly, nodding as if he'd heard similar stories before. "I'm sorry," he said when I finished. I really hoped it would be different this time, that maybe the activity had finally settled down. He paused, looking genuinely apologetic. "I can't keep you on this assignment, David. Not after what you've just described. It's not safe, and I won't be responsible for someone getting hurt." I asked him what he thought was really happening in the mall, what the figures and voices and impossible sounds actually represented. Henderson was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I don't know. But I've been in security for 20 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts. This place, something happened here. Something that left an impression, like a recording that plays back under certain conditions." He looked around the security office with obvious unease. The previous owner mentioned that there had been incidents over the years, medical emergencies, accidents, a few deaths. Maybe that kind of trauma leaves something behind. I never worked another night at Pinewood Mall. Henderson found me a different assignment at an office complex across town, and I never looked back. But I kept in touch with Carlos, who told me that they eventually gave up trying to staff the mall with security guards. After my experience, 3 more guards quit within their first 2 weeks, all reporting similar encounters with impossible sounds, phantom crowds, and voices that shouldn't exist. The mall was demolished 6 months later. The official reason given was structural issues and the cost of maintaining an unused building. But Carlos heard from Henderson that the property owners had received multiple complaints from neighbors about strange lights and sounds coming from the building at night, even when it was supposedly empty. The demolition crew reported finding evidence of recent human activity throughout the building, areas that looked like they had been regularly cleaned and maintained, food wrappers that were far too fresh to have been left by the last tenants, and most disturbing of all, a collection of personal belongings in what used to be the security office that none of the guards recognized as their own. Drive past the empty lot where Pinewood Mall used to stand every day on my way to work at the electrical company, where I finally got hired. Sometimes, especially on overcast days when the shadows are long, I swear I can still see the outline of the building shimmering in the air like a heat mirage. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear the faintest echo of Christmas carols drifting across the empty space, along with the sound of footsteps on floors that no longer exist. The experience taught me that some jobs aren't worth any amount of money, and that there are places in this world where the past refuses to stay buried. I never talk about what happened at the mall with my coworkers or friends. Who would believe such a story? But every security guard should know that some buildings hold on to their history in ways that can't be explained, only experienced in That sometimes the night shift comes with responsibilities that go far beyond checking doors and watching monitors. I should have trusted my instincts when I first saw the beach house. It was too perfect, too affordable, too available during peak season when every other rental property was booked solid. But I was desperate for a vacation after the worst year of my life. And when my cousin Rachel called to tell me about a last-minute cancellation at a property she'd found online, I jumped at the chance without asking enough questions. My name is Jennifer, and what was supposed to be a peaceful week of healing at the beach became a nightmare that still haunts every sunset. I see. The house was located on a stretch of North Carolina coast that was technically private, accessible only through a gated community called Ocean's Edge. Rachel had rented it for a group getaway. Her boyfriend Mark, my friend Kelly, and Kelly's new boyfriend Tyler, who none of us had met before this trip. I'd been looking forward to the distraction after my divorce was finalized and I lost my job in the same month. The beach house seemed like exactly what I needed. Sun, sand, and the chance to forget my problems for 7 days. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon in July, caravanning down from Charlotte in 2 cars loaded with groceries, beach gear, and enough alcohol to fuel a much larger party. The house exceeded even our optimistic expectations. A sprawling 2-story structure with wraparound porches, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private boardwalk leading directly to a pristine stretch of beach. The interior was decorated in an expensive coastal theme with white furniture, nautical accents, and artwork that looked original rather than mass-produced. "How did you find this place?" Kelly asked as we explored the house, marveling at the gourmet kitchen and the master bedrooms. "Panoramic ocean view." Rachel pulled up the rental listing on her phone. I found it on one of those vacation rental sites. The owner had a last-minute cancellation and was offering it at half the usual rate rather than leave it empty. Lucky for us, right? She showed. Used the listing, which featured dozens of professional photos and glowing reviews from previous guests. That first evening was everything we'd hoped for. We grilled steaks on the deck, watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, and fell asleep to the sound of waves lapping at the shore. Mark and Rachel took the master bedroom. Kelly and Tyler claimed the guest room with the ocean view, and I was perfectly happy with the smaller bedroom on the house's north side. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed, but on our second night, I began to notice things that bothered me. Tyler, who had seemed friendly and outgoing during the day, became increasingly quiet as darkness fell. He spent a lot of time standing on the deck, staring out at the ocean, even after the rest of us had moved inside. When Kelly tried to get his attention, he would respond as if he'd been deep in thought about something else entirely. "He's just not used to being away from the city," Kelly explained when I mentioned it. "All this nature and quiet is probably overwhelming for him." I might have accepted that explanation if not for what I observed the next morning. I was an early riser, usually awake before dawn to watch the sunrise, and I'd developed a routine of making coffee and sitting on the deck with a book. But when I stepped outside at 6 a.m., Tyler was already there, sitting in the same chair where I'd left him the night before. His clothes were the same, his position unchanged, as if he'd been there all night. "Did you sleep out here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and non-judgmental. Tyler looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not embarrassed or defensive, but something closer to confused. "I don't really sleep much," he said quietly. "Never have. I find it more restful to just watch." He gestured toward the ocean, where the rising sun was creating a path of golden light across the water. "There's something about the rhythm of the waves that helps me think." I settled into a nearby chair with my coffee, but the comfortable silence I usually enjoyed during my morning routine felt strained with Tyler there. His intense focus on the horizon making me feel like an intruder. Over the next couple of days, Tyler's behavior became more noticeably odd. He rarely ate with the rest of us, claiming he wasn't hungry or had already eaten, though I never saw him preparing food. He didn't participate in our beach activities, preferring to watch from the deck or the house's windows. Most strangely, he seemed to know things about our group that Kelly couldn't have told him. Personal details about Rachel's relationship with Mark, specifics about my recent divorce that I'd never shared with Kelly, even childhood memories that came up in our conversations as if he'd been there when they happened. How did Tyler know that story about your summer camp experience? I asked Kelly privately while we were shopping for groceries in the nearby town. I've never told anyone about what happened with the counselor and the lake. Kelly looked genuinely puzzled. I have no idea. Maybe Rachel mentioned it. You know how stories get passed around in our friend group. But I knew Rachel didn't know that story either. It was something that had happened when I was 12. Traumatic enough that I'd never shared it with anyone. Yet Tyler had referenced it casually during a conversation about childhood fears. That evening, I decided to test my growing suspicions. During dinner, I deliberately told a story that wasn't true. A fabricated memory about getting lost in a corn maze during college, complete with specific details about the weather, the people I was with, and how I'd eventually found my way out. It was convincing enough that Rachel and Kelly laughed at the appropriate moments and added their own comments. But Tyler listened with the same intense focus he gave everything. And when I finished, he said, "That's not what really happened, though, is it?" The table fell silent. Kelly laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" "Jenny just told us what happened." Tyler's gaze never left my face. "She's never been in a corn maze. She has claustrophobia." The story she told is actually from a movie she watched last year when she couldn't sleep after her husband moved out. The accuracy of his observation sent a chill down my spine. He was right. The corn maze story was from a romantic comedy I'd watched during one of my insomnia-fueled Netflix binges. But how could he possibly know that? I excused myself from the table and stepped onto the deck, my hands shaking as I gripped the railing. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, dark and featureless under the cloudy night sky. I tried to rationalize. What had just happened? Maybe Tyler was just perceptive, good at reading people and making educated guesses. Maybe Kelly had told him more about my personal life than she remembered. Maybe I was letting the stress of the divorce and job loss make me paranoid about innocent interactions. But when I turned to go back inside, Tyler was standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have heard his footsteps on the deck. "Boards. You're starting to figure it out," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. I wondered how long it would take. "You're more observant than the others." I stepped backward, putting space between us, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Figure what out? What are you talking about?" Tyler moved closer, and I noticed for the first time that his eyes reflected the porch light like an animal's, creating an unnatural gleam that made my skin crawl. "Kelly didn't bring me here, Jennifer. I've been waiting for you specifically. For all of you, but especially for you." His voice was calm, conversational, but there was an undertone of something predatory that made every instinct the first possessed scream danger. This house, this vacation, this whole setup, it's not the coincidence you think it is. I tried to move toward the sliding door, but Tyler stepped to block my path. "I wouldn't go back inside just yet," he said. "Your friends are indisposed." At the moment, through the glass, I could see into the living room where Rachel and Mark were sitting on the couch, but something was wrong with their posture. They were completely motionless, staring straight ahead with blank expressions, like mannequins positioned to look like people watching television. "What did you do to them?" I demanded, my voice rising with panic. Tyler smiled, and I saw that. His teeth were too sharp, too numerous, filling his mouth in rows like a shark's. Nothing permanent, yet they're just paused while we have our conversation. They won't remember any of this, assuming they survive to remember anything at all. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. Kelly's phone, I realized, recognizing the distinctive case she'd bought at the airport. Kelly's been dead since yesterday morning, Tyler said conversationally, swiping through her messages and photos as if browsing through a magazine. I found her jogging on the beach just after sunrise. She was so focused on her music that she never saw me coming. It was remarkably easy to take her place. Your friend group is so self-absorbed that none of you really look at each other anymore. You notice what you expect to notice and ignore everything else. The full horror of what he was telling me crashed over me like a wave. Kelly was dead. The person I'd been talking to, laughing with, sharing a house with for 3 days wasn't Kelly's boyfriend Tyler. It was something else entirely. Something that had killed my friend and taken her place in our group. "What are you?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Something very old," Tyler replied, "and something very patient. I've been hunting your particular group for months, studying your relationships, your habits, your vulnerabilities. Beach houses are perfect for what I do, isolated, private, surrounded by water that makes escape difficult. And this time of year, with all the tourists and summer crowds, a few missing persons reports get lost in the shuffle." He gestured toward the house behind him. "The real owners of this place have been dead since Memorial Day weekend. I've been using their property to attract suitable prey ever since. I realized that my only chance was to run, but the beach house was located on a private stretch of coast, miles from the nearest neighbors." Tyler seemed to read my thoughts. "The nearest house is 3 miles north, and the access road is gated. I disabled your cars yesterday while you were all at the beach. Even if you could reach them, you won't get far." He moved closer, and I could smell something wrong about him. Not just unwashed human scent, but something chemical and rotten, like meat that had been left in the sun too long. "But I'm not unreasonable," Tyler continued. "I'm going to give you a choice that your friends won't get. You can run, and I'll give you a 5-minute head start before I come after you. If you can survive until dawn, about 4 hours from now, I'll let you live. Consider it a sporting gesture." His smile widened, showing more of those shark-like teeth. "Of course, this stretch of coast has riptides that can drag a strong swimmer out to sea in minutes. And the woods behind the house are filled with things that are almost as dangerous as I am. But theoretically, you have a chance." "I didn't waste it." Time responding. I vaulted over the deck railing and hit the sand running, sprinting toward the water's edge where the sand was firmer and would give me better footing. Behind me, I heard Tyler's laughter, a sound like breaking glass mixed with animal growling. "5 minutes, Jennifer," he called out. "Use them wisely." I ran north along the beach, toward where I hoped I might find other houses or people who could help me. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to show me the way, but also making me visible from a considerable distance. My breath came in sharp gasps, and my legs already ached from the effort of running in soft sand, but terror gave me strength and speed I didn't know I possessed. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, I heard Tyler's voice again, much closer than it should have been. "Time's up." The sound seemed to come from directly behind me, but when I turned to look, I saw something that made me stumble and fall face first into the sand. Tyler was running toward me, but he wasn't human anymore. His limbs were too long, his movement too fluid, like a spider or insect magnified to human size. His face had elongated into something predatory and alien, with those shark teeth gleaming in the moonlight. I scrambled to my feet and changed direction, heading toward the dunes and the scrub forest beyond them. If I could reach the trees, maybe I could find a place to hide, or at least make it harder for him to track me. The sand gave way to seagrass and then to pine needles as I plunged into the woods, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear Tyler crashing through the underbrush, moving with inhuman speed and agility. The forest was dense and disorienting, filled with shadows that looked like threats and sounds that could have been Tyler, or could have been the nocturnal animals he'd mentioned. I tried to move quietly, but my panicked breathing and the crunch of pine needles under my feet seemed impossibly loud in the night air. Every few minutes, I would hear Tyler's voice calling out, sometimes close, sometimes distant, as if he were toying with me rather than seriously pursuing me. "This is my favorite part, Jennifer." His voice echoed through the trees. "The chase. The fear, the desperate hope that maybe this time will be different. I've been doing this for decades, and I've learned to savor each moment. Your friends never got to experience this. They died quickly, almost mercifully, but you get to understand what it means to be prey." I pressed deeper into the woods, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and his voice. My clothes were torn, my arms and legs scratched and bleeding from branches and thorns. But I kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. As the hours passed, Tyler's taunting calls became less frequent, but I knew he was still out there, still hunting. Dawn seemed impossibly far away when I finally found what looked like an old hunting blind or park ranger station, a small wooden structure built into the trees about 8 feet off the ground. I climbed the rickety ladder as quietly as I could, praying that Tyler hadn't heard me moving through the underbrush. The structure was barely large enough for one person, with walls on 3 sides and an open front that faced deeper into the forest. I huddled in the back corner of the blind, trying to control my breathing and listening for any sound that might indicate Tyler's approach. The forest had grown quiet, no bird calls, no rustling of small animals, as if every living thing was hiding from the predator that stalked through their domain. Hours passed in tense silence. My muscles cramped from staying motionless, and several times I nearly dozed off from exhaustion before jerking awake in terror. Just as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I heard footsteps directly below the blind. Slow, deliberate steps circling the tree where I was hidden. "I know you're up there, Jennifer," Tyler's voice said softly. "I can smell your fear, hear your heartbeat. You've done remarkably well, better than most. But dawn is still 20 minutes away, and 20 minutes is a very long time." I looked down through the gaps in the floorboards and saw him standing at the base of the tree, looking up at me with those horrible reflective eyes. His appearance had shifted again during the night. He looked more human now, but somehow that made him more frightening rather than less. The familiar face with the shark teeth and predator's smile was a grotesque mockery of the person I thought I'd known. "Come down on your own, and I'll make it quick," Tyler said. "Make me climb up there, and I'll take my time with you. I'll make sure you experience everything your friends did before they stopped screaming." When I didn't respond, he began climbing the ladder, each rung creaking under his weight. I pressed myself as far back into the corner as I could, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from the tiny enclosed space. Tyler's head appeared at the opening of the blind, his smile wider than any human mouth should be able to stretch. "There. You are," he said, pulling himself up into the structure. "I have to admit, this has been one of my more enjoyable hunts. You've shown real creativity, real survival instinct. It's almost a shame to end it." He reached toward me with fingers that had grown too long, tipped with claws that caught the pre-dawn light. In desperation, I grabbed the only weapon available, a thick piece of broken lumber that had been part of the blind's construction. As Tyler lunged toward me, I swung it with all the strength I had left, connecting with his temple in a blow that would have knocked a human unconscious. Instead, Tyler's head snapped to the side with a wet cracking sound, and when it swiveled back toward me, it was at an impossible angle, nearly upside down on his shoulders. "That was rude," he said, his voice now distorted by his displaced anatomy. His hands reached for his head and twisted it back into roughly the correct position, with more wet cracking sounds. "I was trying to be sporting about this, but now I'm going to have to hurt you." He grabbed my ankle and pulled me toward him with inhuman strength, his claws digging deep enough to draw blood. I kicked at his face with my free foot, my heel connecting with his nose and producing a spray of dark fluid that didn't look like blood. Tyler's grip loosened enough for me to pull free, and I threw myself toward the opening of the blind, tumbling out and hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. I could hear Tyler dropping down behind me as I scrambled to my feet and began running again. But something had changed. The forest was lighter now, and through the trees I could see the glow of real sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Dawn was breaking, and according to Tyler's own rules, that meant I had survived the night. I kept running anyway, not trusting his promise, not believing that something capable of such horror would honor any agreement. Broke through the tree line onto a paved road, just as a park ranger's truck came around a bend, its driver slamming on the brakes when he saw me stumbling out of the forest, bloody and torn and obviously in distress. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he called out, jumping from the truck. "What happened to you?" I collapsed against the side of his vehicle, gasping out a story about being attacked, about needing to call the police, about friends who were in danger at a beach house. The ranger, whose name tag identified him as Officer Morrison, helped me into his truck and radioed for backup while driving toward the coordinates I gave him for the beach house. But when we arrived, the house was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had been living there recently. The walls were bare, the rooms dusty, as if the place had been abandoned for months. "Ma'am, are you sure this is the right house?" Officer Morrison asked gently, probably wondering if I was suffering from some kind of breakdown or drug-induced hallucination. I walked through the rooms where I'd spent 4 days with my friends, where I cooked meals and watched sunsets and felt safe right up until the moment I realized I was sharing space with a killer. But there was no trace of our presence, no evidence that Rachel, Mark, Kelly, or I had ever been there. The official investigation concluded that I'd suffered some kind of psychological episode, possibly triggered by the stress of my recent divorce and unemployment. The beach house belonged to a family named Henderson, who confirmed that they'd been trying to sell it for over a year and hadn't rented it to anyone. There was no record of my friends having rented any property in the area, and when police checked with Kelly's family, they said she'd gone on a solo camping trip and wasn't expected back for another week. But I knew what had happened, even if I couldn't prove it. Tyler, or whatever he really was, had somehow erased all evidence of our presence, leaving me with nothing but memories and scratches that the medical examiner attributed to running through dense forest during a panic attack. Kelly's body was never found, and neither were Rachel's or Mark's. They were simply gone, as if they'd never existed. I moved to a different state after that, changing my name and starting over in a place where no one knew my history. But I never stopped looking over my shoulder, never stopped checking logs, and security systems never stopped scanning crowds for a familiar face that shouldn't be there. Because somewhere out there, Tyler is still hunting, still luring unsuspecting groups to isolated locations, still playing his deadly games with people who think they're safe among friends. The worst part isn't that my friends are dead. It's that I'm the only one who remembers they ever lived. Tyler didn't just take their lives. He erased their existence from the world, leaving me with memories that everyone else believes are delusions. Sometimes I wonder if that was part of his plan all along, to let me survive but make sure no one would ever believe what I'd experienced. It's the perfect crime, creating a witness whose testimony makes her sound insane. I still dream about that beach house, about Tyler's shark teeth and impossible movements, about the sound of my friend's laughter mixing with the crash of waves on an empty shore. But most of all, I dream about other vacation rentals, other groups of friends looking forward to a peaceful getaway, other last-minute deals that seem too good to be true, because I know that somewhere in another beach house or mountain cabin or lakeside cottage, Tyler is setting up his next hunt, waiting patiently for his next group of prey to arrive and thinking they're safe among people they trust. The summer rental season never really ends, and neither does Tyler's hunting season. Every time I see a vacation advertisement or hear friends planning a group trip, I want to warn them, but how do you explain a danger that officially doesn't exist? How do you tell people that the perfect vacation rental might be a trap set by something that feeds on trust and isolation and the particular vulnerability that comes from being far from home? You just hope they're luckier than my friends were, and you try not to think about what might be happening in beach houses and cabins and rental properties all across the country, where groups of friends gather to make memories that might be the last memories they ever make. Because there are things in this world that hunt in ways the human mind wasn't designed to understand. And sometimes the most dangerous invitation you can accept is the one that promises exactly what you think you need most.